Shalom, everyone, and welcome to the second program in the Talking Memory series, The Holocaust in Romania, Filling in the Gaps. The program, Military and Civilian Behavior Towards Jews During and After the Holocaust in Bessarabia and Transnistria, will focus on the research of our speakers on the role of Romanian collaborators. My name is Medin Shachar, and I work at the Ghetto Fighters House as an educator and a guide. I will be your host for today's program. I want to welcome our global audience with a special welcome, as always, to the survivors and their families that are with us today. We want to thank everyone for their support and interest in our programs. After an 11-month hiatus, we are thankful that over the next month, all 4 original programs planned for last fall will take place now, and with all the original speakers. I'm also grateful to be back hosting this series, and personally want to thank our CEO, Igal Cohen, for continuing the Talking Memory webinar while I was not able to participate. I also want to thank Onit Lusky, Director of External Relations, and Yaron Tso, Director of Digital Media, that created and hosted an amazing and relevant series on solidarity during the Holocaust. And speaking of solidarity, during this very challenging time, the Romanian Parliament passed a law establishing that May 14th, the day the State of Israel was established in 1948, will be recognized as the National Day of Friendship and Solidarity with Israel. And so this series is in partnership with 4 organizations, 2 in Israel, 2 in Romania, as well as 3 partners that are with us always. The first is the Amir organization in Israel, the Romanian Cultural Institute in Tel Aviv, and then the Wilhelm Filderman Center for the Study of Jewish History in Romania, and the Elie Wiesel National Institute for Studying the Holocaust, also in Romania. As well, we have Classrooms Without Borders, the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, and the Rabin Chair Forum at George Washington University. For each program in this series, we will have a short presentation about an artifact, document, or testimony from the Ghetto Fighters House archive that is connected to the Holocaust in Romania. Greta Barak, who is an archivist at the Ghetto Fighters House, will be presenting today. But before I introduce her, I want to personally thank her for co-producing this incredible series. She is an expert in the field, as you will soon discover, and her guidance in planning each program was essential to the creation of this series. And now a little bit about Greta. Greta holds an MA in Jewish Studies awarded by Babeș Bolyai University in Romania, and a second MA in Israel Studies awarded by the University of Haifa. She is currently enrolled in the Archival and Information Science Diploma program at Tel Aviv University. She worked as an independent researcher for Hashava, the company for the location and restitution of Holocaust victims' assets, where she engaged in historical, genealogical, and archival research on Holocaust victims in northern Transylvania. After relocating to Israel, she conducted historical research on the Holocaust in Romania in a law firm, mainly for legal support of Holocaust survivors' compensation claims from Germany and Romania. Greta is a full-time archivist at the Ghetto Fighters House. She is involved in several cataloging and digitization, the worst word in the world, digitization projects of archival materials, including archival collections concerning the history of Romanian Jewry. As well, she provides reference services and assistance for researchers and the general public. Greta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Medin, and I'm really happy to see you with us in this program, to have you back with me here. I also want to thank you everyone for joining us tonight. As Medin already mentioned, as part of our series, I will share with you at the beginning of each webinar a story from our archive. Today, I will be speaking about Gershon Knispel's art series, The Death March of Romanian Jewry. Gershon Knispel, a leading Israeli artist, was known for his firm socialist views, his beliefs in universal humanist values, and for his identification with marginalized groups whose rights were trampled on by repressive forces. His social and historical awareness left a unique trademark on his art, and his works included a wide spectrum of mediums: prints, oil paintings, murals, and bas-reliefs. In Israel, his work is mostly identified with the social realism of the 50s. However, in Brazil, a country he lived for several years in different periods of his life, He was recognized as a Holocaust artist. A broader picture on Gershon Knispel and his life and work can be found in the retrospective album that was published in 2016, and who is interested in the subject, I strongly recommend it. Throughout his life, Knispel was exposed to the memory of the persecution of Jews in the World War II. First of all, he was born in Germany in 1932, and he immigrated with his parents to Palestine in 1935 because of the Nazis that got to power in Germany. Part of his family stayed in Germany and they were killed during the Holocaust. He also had an aunt that survived Theresienstadt. He was also influenced by Bertolt Brecht, who was in direct contact with him and asked Knispel to illustrate the Children Crusade poema, which tells the story of a group of children in Poland who are wandering, trying to escape the atrocities of the Second World War. And of course, one of the main influences was the meeting with the Holocaust survivors. One encounter especially shaped his artistic representation of the Holocaust, and this is the meeting with Yehiel Denur, known under his pen name Katsetnik, a Jewish writer and Holocaust survivor whose writings mainly inspired by his imprisonment in the Auschwitz concentration camp. Katsetnik asked Knispel in 1966 to illustrate his new book, Star of Ashes. I want to read for you a short paragraph about the interaction between the two. I informed Katsetnik that the job was too much for me to handle because I had not been at Auschwitz and so lacked the means of dealing with that other planet, as he referred to it during his testimony at the Eichmann trial. On Yom Kippur Eve, I was startled by heavy pounding. At the door stood a bedraggled figure, breathing heavily, pushed past me, locked the door from inside, placed the key in his pocket and said, "We are not leaving here until you have gone through Auschwitz with me." And without any warning, he launched into a marathon monologue. Yom Kippur of all days. I felt totally overwhelmed, helpless, and close in losing consciousness. And then it all began to take shape. His stories reverberated to the depths of one's soul. It was a continuous nightmare that spilled over into enormous canvases, reflected in my prints, me incapable of functioning as before. So, what is the story of the Death March of Romanian Jewry art series? Well, in 2016, 2 years before Knispel died, he donated to the Ghetto Fighters House 20 artworks, oil on canvas, which he painted in Brazil during 1997-1998. The series, entitled The Death March of Romanian Jewry, is the result of Knispel's encounter with the testimony of another Holocaust survivor, namely with Michael Stivelman, and it is based on Stivelman's memoir, The Death March, which was published in Brazil in 1997. Michael Stivelman, the son of Riva and Jakob Stivelman, was born in 1928 in the town of Securen in northern Bessarabia. On the 6th of July 1941, after the start of the Barbarossa Operation, Romanian and German armies entered Securen. According to Stivelman's testimony and of other survivors, a pogrom was carried out during the first days of the occupation, in which many of the town's Jews were murdered. The rioters, soldiers and civilians alike, moved from house to house, broke down doors, robbed Jewish property, shot Jews in their homes and in the street, and raped women and girls. In the second week after the occupation, an auction was held in Securen. Jewish men, women, and children were sold to peasants who received the army's permission to take the Jews' clothes and their property and then decide their fate. Stivelman and his parents managed to hide. Nevertheless, on the second half of July, they were deported together with other Jews from Securen on foot in a convoy without a predetermined destination and without food or water. The deportees were looted several times and most of them died of exhaustion or were shot by Romanian gendarmes. In September 1941, Stivelman's father was killed in Kosovutz forest, while Michael and his mother continued their march across the Dniester River to Transnistria. On their way to Obodovka, they collapsed from exhaustion. Luckily, they managed to hide on the side of the road from the eyes of the soldiers and survived thanks to the help of some Ukrainian women from the surrounding villages that gave them shelter. After the war, they immigrated to Brazil. Michael Stivelman did not talk about these events for many years. Fear, guilt, a desire to look forward and not to hurt his family were just some of the reasons for his silence. I was not protecting them when I deprived them of the right and the prerogative of sharing my past and my heart, of knowing me and loving me whole. With my silence, I was failing to honor and serve those who had been with me in Securen, but who, unlike me, never had a chance to survive, to live on and be happy. I was forgetting my duty to my people. Knispel answered Stivelman wished to commemorate the Securen Jewish community and to bring justice to the ones that were killed. He used his artistic skills to complement Stivelman's story with visual representations. I would like to show you some of the works from the collection. You can see here two representations of the riots of July 1941. At first glance, the two works appear schematic as a documentary draft of a developing situation. In the left picture, you can see two standing figures outlined with a black oil marker. The left one, probably a civilian with a stick in his hands, and on the right, a soldier with a rifle bayonet. Behind them, a row of houses. Black and purple lines outline two figures lying on the street. One of them is wearing a dress. The faces are drawn in general lines without details. The background color reveals that the event is taking place in the broad daylight, in full view in front of us. One of the questions Knispel faces in the series is how to represent a violent and traumatic event while at the same time preserving the privacy and dignity of the victims. You can see a Katzetic influence on Knispel's here, as one cannot help but think of the words of Katzenik from Star of Ashes. Here it is, the exposed underpart of man lying over the brick stove of a block in Auschwitz. Body, who are you? Did your body belong to a man in his spring, a young sun god aglow in May's dawn? You also have in the series two works that focus exclusively on the perpetrator, represented by the soldier with a rifle bayonet, which is a recurrent motive in Knispel's art in general. If someone is interested in this subject, I can develop it privately and give more information. And of course, you have the dead marches, which are depicted in several ways. You have paintings that have abstract elements as well as ones with realistic elements. They include the iconographic motif that evolved in Knispel's art, namely the image of the masses as a collective entity, the victim. A column of hunched human figures who are making their way from a place where terrible things have transpired towards an unknown destination, as Batya Donner defines the Knispel motif later. Nevertheless, most of the works from the series are portraits, executed in a wide palette of color and layers. Knispel is picking figures from the anonymous crowd and places them into the spotlight, as he is not satisfied with the representation of the victim as an anonymous body only. For Knispel, the victim is not just a victim, but first of all, a human being who had dreams and desire, a life of his own. He is using as a base for some of the portraits family photographs published in Stivelman's memoir. You can see on the cover of the book of the Death March a red picture where is actually Riva Stivelman together with Michael. And on the right side, you have Knispel's version of it. Knispel is picking figures. Knispel basically is using the family photograph and transforms it in one of his recurring symbols, which is the mother and the child. If you are familiar with Knispel's work in general, you'll see this figure in a lot of his works, not just related to the Holocaust. What the artist is actually doing is dissolves borders. He transfers the story of the Filderman family from the private dimension to the universal one and integrates the story of the Romanian Jews during the Holocaust into the overall story of the Jewish people. But first of all, he chooses to answer Filderman's wish to remember and commemorate the Jewish world of Bessarabia in all its vividness as expressed in Filderman's memoir. And I'm quoting Michael Filderman's words. My mourning at the death of practically my whole family had to be expressed. In my mind and my heart, I bear with me the images of all those people I knew, who were dear and meant a lot to me. My father, my mother, my uncles and cousins and other relatives, my childhood friends, my Christian mother who saved and adopted me. I have conjured them up in this revival of memories that have made them even more present, more living. I'm going to finish now. I'm just going to say that all the works that you saw today are available on the Ghetto Fighters House archive. And of course, if any one of you has any question, you're more than free to write me. Thank you.
Greta, thank you so much. And I think that, first of all, showing that archival work is fascinating. And I think that the Ghetto Fighters House archive definitely has an incredible collection. Secondly, that we have art and that survivors actually asked artists to reflect the humanity and the people, not just the numbers and the faceless spaces and the numbers and numbers of people. So I think that the examples that you brought show that very well. It's incredible because it wasn't a personal experience of Knispel. And it reminds me of Chaim Guri that, you know, he also didn't have a personal connection, but yet was able to use his skills as an artist, as a writer. So this is an incredible example. By the way, I told Goethe just the other day, I was walking down the street and I saw a sculpture that I probably had seen before and I just didn't pay attention. And suddenly I looked at it. My husband and I said, we know that artist. And it was Knispel. And it's not the one that you showed. It's another one for the fallen soldiers, but it's in Haifa. So a lot of his work is in Haifa, like he told me. So thank you again for the presentation. We look forward to your presentation next week. So now we're going to move on to our next speaker. Let me just get organized. Adrian Cioflâncă is the director of the Wilhelm Filderman Center for the Study of Jewish History in Romania and a researcher with the A.D. Cioflâncă Institute of History. Between 2012 and 2024, he was a member of the Collegium of the National Council for the Study of the Securitate Archives. He was a member of the International Commission on the Holocaust in Romania between 2003 and 2004, and an expert in the Presidential Commission for the Analysis of the Communist Dictatorship in Romania, co-author of the final reports of the two commissions. Since 2005, he is a member of the Romanian delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. From 2022, he is a member in the Holocaust Photographs Expert Group of the European Holocaust Research Infrastructure. He was a Tzipora Wiesel Fellow of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. Between 2010 and 2012, he was a director of the department within the Institute for the Investigation of the Communist Crimes and the Memory of the Romanian Exile. Cioflâncă co-edited 8 collective volumes, among which the most recent, Discourse in Anti-Semitic Violence in Modern Romania, that was published by Hasefer in Bucharest in 2020. He also authored studies in areas such as the history of the Holocaust, the history of communism, visual documentation of atrocities, politics of memory, and archives of the recent past. He co-directed with the filmmaker Radu Jud the documentaries The Exit of the Trains in 2020 and Memories from the Eastern Front in 2022, both premiered at Berlinale. And Adrian, we are honored to have you here this evening. The floor is yours.
Dear Madeleine, thank you. Thank you for having me. You have quite an audience here. I'm honored. My presentation, which I'm going to share right now, is about a new subject. The title of the presentation is Romanian Killing Units, the case of the police companies on the Eastern Front between 1941 and 1942. Let me make several clarifications from the beginning. I'm sorry for the graphic image, but this is quite new. I got it from the Odessa archives in December, 3 months before the war started in Ukraine. As you probably know, the regional archives in Odessa are placed in an old synagogue, which is very fragile, and the entire thing is a metaphor for the fragility of memory in these days. And the photo shows actually a Romanian killing unit. The photo is extracted from an album created by KGB, probably based on the work of the Commission for the Documentation of War Crimes on the territory of the Soviet Union. The second thing, the presentation is mostly focused on perpetrators. I don't allot much space to the victims in this case, which I'm not usually doing, but this is the part of the novelty of the presentation, the research on perpetrators. The third thing, this relies on different archives, and one of them is the archive of my center, Wilhelm Filderman Center for the Study of the History of the Jews in Romania. This is a research facility created in 1977 by the Jewish Federation by the Federation of Jewish Communities in Romania. It hosts the historical archives of the Jewish communities in Romania with very important material and original, and also with the very important photo archive. What I'm doing here is I just want to open a working site. This is a new subject because nobody paid attention to the role of the police units in the mass killings in Romania and in Bukovina, Bessarabia and Transnistria so far. And I came to this subject working for a film with Radu Jude. It is called Memories from the Eastern Front. The starting point of the film is an album which I found in the National Museum of Romanian History. The album is called Moments from the War Against Bolshevism, experienced by a cavalry regiment commanded by Colonel Radu Corne. And I immediately noticed the absence from this album of a photo of Edinets. This regiment was in Edinets and was involved along with other military units in the killing of the Jews of this small but important town with a Jewish majority in Bessarabia. The film contrasts the heroic narrative of the album, which depicts the campaign, the military campaign on the Eastern Front, as a nice journey, as a ethnographic exploration, and a sort of colonial conquest of the people from Bessarabia and Ukraine, with the materials which I extracted from the military archives and the archive of the National Council for the Securitate Archive, which documents the crimes committed on the Soviet territory by units of the Cavalry Corp and their associated police platoons. while documenting the film, I observed the frequent use of the police units as execution platoons against Jews. And subsequently, I expanded the research on other police companies and platoons, which also played a major role in the massacre of Jews on the Eastern Front, and more generally in the implementation of anti-Semitic policies by Ion Antonescu and the general staff of the Romanian army. As I said, this subject was not covered by previous historiography. The first generation of studies on the Holocaust in Romania focused on demonstrating the responsibility of Ion Antonescu and his regime for the Holocaust in Romania. Radu Ioanid left the country in the 80s because he found the atmosphere in Romania as unbearable. He defended his PhD about fascist intellectuals, but he was not able to publish his book because of the communist censorship. At the same time, Jean Ancer, who left Romania in the 50s, came back in the 80s as a result of a protocol between Yad Vashem and this Romanian Institute for the History of the Communist Party, which was, the protocol was made only for diplomatic reasons by the Romanian side. And Ancer discovered, and Ioanid as well, they discovered that the communist regime was very well against the recognition of Romania's responsibility for the Holocaust. And actually, they repeated in their official discourse some of the topics and the way of defending the role of Romania used by the Antonescu regime. So the birth of the denial movement in Romania was in the 70s and in the 80s, and Ancer and Ioanid fought against that. They had an important role in the creation of the Wieser Commission, which drafted the final report, which was the academic instrument used by the Romanian state in order to admit its responsibility for the involvement in the Holocaust. But keeping in mind this important purpose of these two historians, we understand that they didn't pay attention to the actually functioning of the system. We still don't have monographic studies focused on the role of different military and police units in the Holocaust. There are several studies written by Marius Kazan and Ion Popa and Roland Clark, but they focus on several military units which are not police units. We also have a recent book by Grant Harvard, which follows the connection between the course of military operation and the Holocaust. And the important book of Vladimir Solonare, which devotes significant attention to the actions of gendarmerie, pointing some important elements about our subject, the importance, for example, of the institutional culture for the dynamics of violence, different responses to the orders of the Antonescu regime, blind conformism, zeal, or sometimes refusal to follow orders. So he makes like a rather different, more complicated image of what happened in Romania and the Eastern Front. But on the other side, the two historians they don't notice the importance of the police units. As I said, they focus on the gendarmerie units, which acted mostly on the rural side of Bessarabia and Bukovina. In the case of the police units, they were more active in the towns and cities, and they depended mostly on the military units on the Eastern Front. So there is a different type of dynamics in their case. I suppose one of the reasons why the subject is not well known and documented in the historiography is related to the state of the archives. Because there is this assumption by several historians that the collections of documents referring to the gendarmerie, to the police units, and also to the Praetorate services of the Romanian army. Let me clarify that the Praetorate is a sort of strange institution which copied the Roman classic model. The Praetor is a sort of a prosecutor and an officer responsible with the order of the back of the front of the rear army. But the praetors were also essential actors for the Holocaust because they transmitted and enforced the orders of Ion Antonescu in relation to the Jewish population. So it's very difficult to locate collections of documents related to these institutions. This suspicion that the archives were destroyed has some basis because some of the people of the Antonescu regime remained in power for several months after August 44, when Romania changed the alliances, and they were able to destroy sometimes or to steal documents from archives, which were not very well organized. But we don't have an image of the magnitude of this process. But I still believe this was not massive, because otherwise we would have had some traces in the archives of the process of destruction and stealing. Taking a deeper look in the archives, I discovered a new collection which is called the Ministry of War, Gendarmerie and Police, which is actually what remained to this day from the main collection of the police and praetorate units and their role on the Eastern Front in 1942-43, and with several files dedicated to the important year which we are discussing about, 1941. They cover the activity of several police units. Other files can be found in the National Archives of Moldova, but the most important collection for this discussion are, of course, in the National Archives for the Study of the Securitate Archives, because this is the institution which holds the documentation of the post-war trials. And I discovered that there are more than 15 trials dedicated to different groups of policemen and praetors from military units involved in the Holocaust. Some of them are copied by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and the Yad Vashem. Some are not. So most of the books to this moment about the Holocaust were written abroad, and they relied mostly on the documents from these two institutions. And the fact that some of the files are not there may explain why the subject was not covered. As you know, Romania was involved in 6 waves of violence against the Jews. Crimes against Jews were perpetrated during 3 types of fascist regimes between 1940 and 1944. My presentation focuses on the 3rd, 4th, and the 5th wave of mass killings. So crimes which were perpetrated by Ion Antonescu and his officers. I went through a large amount of documentation covering numerous police companies and platoons, and I discovered documents relating several of them to mass killings, and you have a list of them here. As you can see from the scheme, I attached the usually the police unit depended directly on the commander of a grand unit, or division, or a regiment, which issued orders through the praetor. And there was the possibility for the praetor or the commander of the division or the regiment to command directly people from police platoons. And this fact is important. And I will reserve some of my time to explain the mechanism of issuing orders on the Eastern Front, because this is important. There has been a long discussion in the historiography of the Holocaust about different mechanisms of decision-making, and the old model of a top-down decision-making process, which in a simple process by which orders are issued by the Supreme Commander, and they are transmitted in a regular way through the hierarchical structure to the lowest level of the military hierarchy without feedback and without difference in the fulfillment of the orders. That model was revised. And it is important to keep in mind that in the case of the German army and also the Romanian army, new rules for the exercise of command were issued for the Romanian army in 1941. And there is this brochure which was distributed to all the military units, which changed some of the classic principles of conducting war, which were used in the First World War. Because the Germans used the Blitzkrieg. This is a very fast, quick way of conducting war. So they focused on the importance of speed decisions and communication. They gave a prevalence to the verbal orders towards the written orders, to field activity, over the office work. And it also relied on the initiative, adaptability, and determination of the commander. So in this new rule, the commander plays an important role, and it is easier for the superior commander to contact directly commanders from brigade or platoon or even smallest level, and to interfere with their missions and to order direct missions, in this case killing missions, directly to these killing platoons. And there is a focus on these normatives, on the fact that orders are executed as they are given. So there was not space theoretically for negotiations, but in fact, as we can see from different cases, and I summarized what I've been reading in archives in the last 10 years, what I noticed in different situations. Ion Antonescu and his officers usually issued radical but very vague framework orders, which placed the responsibility of interpretation, autonomy, and initiative on subordinates. And when they send feedbacks and questions, and where they said they cannot follow an order because it's logistically impossible to apply or stuff like that, Antonescu and the officer issued other vague orders. So this is a clear strategy to be vague in order to trigger the initiative of the subordinates. Also, in the case of anti-Semitic killings, the officers relied massively on secret orders. This doesn't mean that we don't have written orders related to the main massacres. Actually, I suppose we have more written orders than the case of Nazi Germany. So we have different types of written orders related to the Iași pogrom, to the order for the cleansing of the land, although this order was explicitly verbal, and the units were told that these units should be kept oral, but still there are traces in archives of the order. We have a series of orders related to the Odessa massacre and so on. As I said, the fact that the officers were able to bypass the military hierarchy was very important for the dynamics of the events. And because in 1940, when the Romanian authorities retreated from Bessarabia, there was a conflict between the military and the police. In 1941, Ion Antonescu intervened and stated the prevalence of the military units over the police units. So the police units were subordinated to the military units, and the police units were abstracted from fulfilling their disciplinary function in relation to the military units. So whenever there was chaos, there were robberies, there were killings in a city, police units were not able to intervene because they were immediately accused of collaborating with the Soviets or being unpatriotic and so on. And there are several factors which influence the transmission and the execution of the orders. Among the missions of the military units, the anti-Semitic missions were perceived as the higher cause. So whenever there was a competition between different types of missions, this was perceived as the most important one. And other missions were sacrificed in comparison in this competition. The military and the police units also perceived a consensus related to the anti-Semitic policies. And they also they perceived the validation from the highest authority. In June 1941, with the official discourses of Ion Antonescu, Mihai Antonescu and higher ranked officers. There are 2 or 3 important points made by them in public interventions, but also in direct orders issued to the army. One, that the war is the best opportunity for Romania to accomplish the ethnical cleansing of Romania. Secondly, that this is the opportunity to have revenge for the humiliation from 1940, for which the Jews were blamed. The events in 1940 are very complicated and they deserve a separate discussion. But actually, the Romanian authorities and the Romanian troops faced the hostility not only of the Jews when they retreated from Bessarabia as a result of the Soviet ultimatum to cede, to give Bessarabia, a part of Bukovina, to the Soviet state. So they faced the hostility not only of the Jews, but also of the Bessarabian, of the rural population, of almost everybody, in any case, of many people. But it was very difficult for the Antonescu regime to admit that Bessarabian were against the Romanian authorities. And this is why the official propaganda turned the blame only on the Jews. But as we can see in 1941, the orders were targeted not only the Jews, but also those who fled the army in 1940, meaning the Bessarabians, and those who collaborated with the Soviet authorities were proved to be hostile to the Romanian authorities when they retreated. So there is this perception that at this moment the regime validated the use of violence against the Jews. That was a general belief, a general feeling among many military. Also, we can see in documents that in the process of interpreting different operational situations, the anti-Semitic causality or explanation is preferred and imposed by the military hierarchy. So, for example, when Odessa resisted during the siege, Antonescu blamed the Jews for that. And this offered the rationale for killing them when they conquered the city. Whenever an incident happened along the line, the front line, the Jews were blamed for different acts of spying, sabotage, and stuff like that. We can also see from documents frequent use of physical violence among military, and also the use of threats and peer pressure whenever a soldier or an officer resisted to a criminal order. They try to when they try to stop a killing or to refuse to obey orders. What made the things more complicated and confusing were the fact that there were no clear indications for the collaboration between the Romanian and the German troops, and also the fact that there was poor communication among the Romanian military units. The poor equipment of the army and the low incomes also made legitimate the use of forced requisitions and the robberies for personal benefit. Also, it is very important to follow the importance of poor training and the indiscipline within the military, which plays an important role in different situations when massacres took place. Also, the army granted through different interventions the impunity of the soldiers for their involvement in robberies and crimes, although theoretically the general orders and regulations were against any individual robbery or amongst acts of indiscipline in the rear army. Also, the army contributed to the very tense atmosphere in the military through the transmission of orders which were unclear and actually were the main agents of panic and arbitrary in the military, because they didn't operate with clear categories when they spoke about Jews, communist commissars, spies, saboteurs, and parachutists, partisans, and also they pointed to the cunning behavior of the Soviet agents. So with an untrained army, with different tense situations, with this anti-Semitic framework of interpreting everything that was happening on the front line, in many cases, the military and the police units which were sent to solve a situation, they just selected the entire Jewish population from different communities. Sometimes they selected different categories of them. Sometimes they killed entire communities along the front. The most important order for the operations against Jews on the Eastern Front is an order which is similar to the Commissar order issued for Wehrmacht, which was transmitted at the beginning of July. There was some misunderstanding in the first generation historiography, which assumed that the order was issued before the onset of the Barbarossa Operation, but this is not true. This order was made public to the military and especially to the gendarmes and police units at the beginning of July in different phases by different persons and in different versions. So we have right now in archives like hundreds of testimonies of policemen and gendarmes who heard the order, and the different interpretation of the content of the order is amazing. And this is another proof that the order it was intentionally vague, and because it was vague, it had genocidal effects. So this order was applicable not only to the gendarmes units, but also to the police units. As I said, each important military unit had a police unit attached, which initially had the mission to fulfill missions like that, to guard the military unit, to guard the marches of the military unit, to stop the interference of civilians with the military, to prevent different acts of violence against the military. But they had their roles radically changed once they started to march on the Eastern Front. So immediately they were supposed to guard ghettos and camps, to guard groups of Jews, to round up Jews, and to create columns of Jews who were driven to ghettos, camps, or execution sites. They were also supposed to fulfill missions of political police, which were not radically new for them, because starting with the 30s, also the military and the police units were involved in different missions of political police. This happened before the fascist dictatorship, but still they were never good at that. They were very violent, they were very abusive, and they continued to be like that on a larger scale when they were on the Eastern Front. So my perspective is to focus, and I will hurry up, to focus on the micropolitics of violence. So we cannot draw from what's happening around Ion Antonescu a clear image which is valid for the entire front. So we have to take a look on each situation of violence, because the Holocaust is an archipelago of situations of violence with different dynamics, with different types of actors which are involved, with different motivations. So it is important to understand not only the role of anti-Semitism, but how anti-Semitism is operated in different military contexts, because sometimes violence is related to situations of danger. So actually, the most dangerous situation for the Jews was when the optimism of the commanders conflicted with the counterattacks of the Soviets. I suppose Diana will speak about Pepe in a while. The massacre happened when the Soviets counterattacked, and the gendarmes used this pretext to kill the Jews, invoking a military danger. So the most dangerous situation when there is this conflict between optimism and danger provoked, triggered by the attacks or the resistance of the Soviets. And so I won't take too much on the case studies I select for this presentation, but I realized that the police units are involved in some of the most important massacres along the front line, starting with the Iași pogrom, continuing with the bloody July, how it is called by Simon Geisbühler in his book. So the series of massacres in Bessarabia and Bukovina, perpetrated by all kinds of units, because at the first glance it's very difficult to have a clear image which types of military units were involved in killings and which are not. Sometimes the killing units were created based on voluntary decisions by interventions of higher officers, which selected people from different units to make a massacre. So we have cavalry units, infantry units, artillery units, ranger units involved in different killings. But what is important for our subject is the fact that the police companies and platoons were from a certain point specialized as killing platoons, executioner platoons for the military units. So they were supposed to fulfill to undergo the dirty job of the military units, that is to kill civilian population, and especially Jews from different cities and villages. And as I said, they are involved, for example, in the Gidigic massacre, for which in most of the materials you can read about, the blame was focused only on this 10th Divisional Machine Gun Battalion. But actually, when you pay attention to the documents, you realize that also this police company was involved in the massacre. It was attached to the 10th Infantry Division. The killing site in Gidigic is not marked, as far as I know. Maybe Diana knows better. I visited the site and the place of the initial incident, which triggered the decision of the Romanian army to punish the Jews for confronting Romanian soldiers in the train station of Gidigic. And the collaboration between these two units is important for understanding the killings in Odessa, because these two small units were involved in the largest mass killings in Odessa, those in which hundreds, maybe thousands of Jews were killed in different barracks. They were burned alive, and in the end, the two units put grenades and explosive to kill all the Jews there. You know the story of the Odessa massacre, which was triggered by the explosion of this building, where the Romanians placed the commandment, the headquarter of the military, or the military headquarter of Odessa. And as I said, in this case, there are clear traces in archives of the direct personal orders of Ion Antonescu to conduct reprisals and mass killings of Jews. And in this case, the order was transmitted hierarchically to the divisions, regiments, and also to the police companies. And these images are relatively new from an album which I found also in the National Museum of History. So my time is up. I just want to mention that many people from these police companies were convicted. And also I also follow the case of other police units. For example, this one is involved in an infamous massacre which took place near Dniester in Vâlcineț. So the Romanians tried to push the Jews over the Dniester, but the Germans opposed this move, and in the end, the Romanians decided to kill them all. And border units and also from the police units were involved in this massacre. And also it is important to follow the activity of these two platoons, police platoons, which were involved in many mass killings in Bessarabia. And in this case, it is important to follow the activity of the commander of the Cavalry Corp, the General Mihail Rakoviță, who was openly anti-Semitic, and he also issued many direct orders to kill Jews. And as I said at the beginning, one of the massacres is this one in Edinets, and also in other places. This is a photo from the album which was included in the film I made with Radu Jude. Thank you.
I have to say that there are a few things that you talked about that really caught my attention when we're thinking about these micro histories. Things with the new rules that you talked about, the initiative, the autonomy, the secret orders, and bypassing, and that every police unit or military unit, they almost worked on their own, but yet everybody had the same goal. It really is important research that you're doing to understand how the police and the military worked. We talked about this in Warsaw with Jan Grabowski and others, and now we're adding Romania as well. And I think that you really made a very, very clear list. I'm sure it's not a full list of the different reasons and the different initiatives that were involved in getting to the point where, as Olga Stefan, I think, wrote, that the massacres by the Romanian military and police was the second largest to the German. So we are now going to move on to our final speaker. I want to introduce her. Dr. Diana Dumitru is Ioan Raciu Visiting Professor in Romanian Studies at Georgetown University. She is specializing in Holocaust studies in Eastern Europe, nationality policies, anti-Semitism in the USSR, and late Stalinism with a focus on post-war trials in the Soviet Union. Her academic achievements include prestigious fellowships such as the Woodrow Wilson Center Fellowship, Fulbright Visiting Scholarship at Georgetown University, Research Fellowship at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, Fellowship at the Vienna Wiesenthal Institute for Holocaust Studies, and a Research Fellowship at the Imre Kertész College at Jena University in Germany. She published her second book, The State, Anti-Semitism, and Collaboration in the Holocaust, The Borderlands of Romania and the Soviet Union, with Cambridge University Press in 2016. Currently, she is engaged in two projects, one with Chad Bryant and Katerina Kapkova on the trial that shook the world, the Slansky process and the dynamics of Czechoslovak Stalinism, and her own book manuscript, Indispensable Yet Suspect, Soviet Jews Under Late Stalinism. Additionally, Dr. Dumitru serves on the editorial boards of Holocaust and Genocide Studies, East European Jewish Affairs, and the Journal of Genocide Research. And we are very happy to have us today. Diana, the floor is yours.
Hello, hello and good evening to all people from different time zones. Thank you so much for joining this conversation. And first of all, thank you to the organizers for putting together the panel and being really committed to having this panel happening. And really thank you to my colleagues. I really learned a lot from your talks, and it was very interesting to hear and share your research with us. Yeah, excellent. I really learned a lot. I'm looking forward actually to talk more and hear and more from you, and also seeing your publications. So I'll briefly do the same. I'll share my presentation with you. Yep, let me do this. Okay. Can you see everything well? And,
yes.
Okay, great. So I just want to explain that what I'll be talking about is a part actually of my book that I'm currently writing and I'm about to finish writing. So it's about like Jews in Soviet Moldova after the Holocaust. And so I'll be focusing in this like maximum 20-25 minutes that I'll have to look at several aspects, to look at the issue of revenge, to look at the issue of fear, and to look at the issue of justice. Because I found that they're probably one of the least researched topics when people look at the post-Holocaust events. A lot is happening. Yeah, we do know a lot about like Jews coming back home, starting their lives anew in different places. We also know quite a bit about like post-war trials, but I think there's still like so much to learn, especially in places like Bessarabia and Transnistria. So understanding that actually not necessarily that the audience is like well versed in the history of Romania and geography of Romania. I just briefly mentioned that the territory in the focus of my research is like Bessarabia, of course, nowadays like known as Moldova, and Transnistria. So I kind of like made a small list here of this like shifting geography and shifting like polity, like state authorities, like in the interwar era when Bessarabia was part of Romania. And then in 1941, because of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, it was annexed by the Soviet Union. And again, from 1940 until 1941, the administration of Romania, and after the end of war, part of the Soviet Union. But because I said that I'm going to like speak a little bit about revenge, I just like wanted to point to the fact that how rare is the conversation about revenge in the Holocaust studies, and how long, excuse me, it took to speak about this subject, because only relatively recently you had the book of Dina Porat just like 2 years ago, Nakam, the Holocaust survivors who sought like full-scale revenge. And it's a difficult subject to tackle. And it's not because the desire of revenge was not there, but because it has a very complex relationship with the issue of justice and the issue of forgiveness. And because also even the knowledge about revenge may in turn like get intermingled with other unpleasant consequences. I'll be happy like to talk more about specific examples that I have in mind. But for my case, I want to point like to and I want to clarify that in this like relatively short talk, I want to basically pinpoint to the main trends that I've seen in my sources, so that to create somehow not a very detailed, not a very comprehensive, but I kind of to sketch the territory and to share with you my main conclusions from that array of sources that I've seen while researching for my book. So the issue of vengeance and especially acting on that vengeance is directly related to the Jewish people who had guns. And of course, I mean by this, I mean Jewish soldiers or Jewish partisans. And there are scholars that actually have done a better work than I've done in this field. And I'm thinking about like Arkady Zeltser and Anna Sternches, who worked specifically with Jewish soldiers' sources. And they already come to the conclusion that it was like widely spread, this idea of revenge. And although we don't know, we don't have like direct materials that would tell us how many cases of like, taking illegal extrajudicial measures against perpetrators. They do say that actually from oral histories, from other sources, from written EGO documents, we can imply that it was not that unheard of cases with that like small and rare. People do comment, so we do have a feeling that they were happening. And also in some other sources, we see, and again, most interestingly, you do find about those like extrajudicial actions from oral histories. What is interesting for me is like I'm trying to understand how Jews, in this case, not necessarily just the Jewish soldiers and Jewish partisans who acted on them, but also Jewish observers or Jewish survivors, how they viewed such actions. And it seems to me from the comments of survivors that they perceived such actions as the best way and the fairest way of like bringing justice. When the Soviet authorities returned to Bessarabia and of course like to other areas that were previously viewed as occupied by the Axis allies, the entire population now became somehow widely split into like two categories: people who lived under the occupation and people who did not live under the occupation. So people who lived under the occupation were frequently under some kind of suspicion, like white suspicion. So it's interesting to look into the dynamic between the two groups who had different World War II experience, and also to understand how Jews fare into this like complex, like tension. And I'll give you example in like a minute, but what we do see in historiography would like the tension is about the authorities, like party authorities, like state authorities. They would have a really like an expectation that the local population would behave to whatever like moral demands that the states would have. But the scholarship is showing, rightly so, that the context of occupation was complex. There were many nuances of gray and like white and black and everything. And people adjusted to the occupation. There were various ways of working around or with the occupation. The interesting part comes up from this project is actually how much the Jewish survivors, who are other direct survivors from the camps of Transnistria, in the case that I studied, or the Jewish survivors who came with the army or from the evacuation, how they actually hold to the same demands that a political authority would want. They basically would want the non-Jews, the non-fellows to reach up to those standards of brotherhood, of like courage and sacrifice. But as we know, the reality was very different. So there were various avenues to seek justice, of course, in addition to the extrajudiciary killings that I mentioned before. One was to work with the extraordinary state commissions that Adrian just mentioned before. And they did a tremendous work. Like they put together 11,000 names of perpetrators. Many of them were collected actually with the help of Jewish survivors. And that's an interesting point to like stay with the audience, because I'm still astounded how many really good scholars, I'm sorry, still make the mistake of claiming that collaboration was not punished and that collaboration was a taboo topic inside the Soviet Union after World War II. And just these simple numbers just show us clearly that was not the case. And actually, as I will show, the Jewish effort to the post-war justice is probably one of the most overlooked aspects and one of the most interesting findings, at least like for me. Then, of course, getting in touch with local authorities or with security organs, since like everybody understood that security organs were the ones that were dealing with this kind of crimes. Also, in a typical Soviet styles, approaching Soviet media or approaching renowned figures and Soviet officials was also an option. And I'm talking here basically about agency and how Jews were trying to make sense or make amends or extract revenge or think about like various ways of like how to fix the pain and that was inflicted to them as a group and as an individual. So it's interesting. I'll give you just a couple of the various types of such agency. So here in December 1944, a Jewish soldier, wrote an article to Ehrenburg, Ilya Ehrenburg, who was the famous Soviet Jewish journalist, and saying like, could you write an article that would mobilize our entire people to hate the traitors of our motherland, and so that they, the traitors, would receive the deserved punishment? So in this case, clearly the guy is trying to make Edinburgh to have this appeal to a really broad audience, because he published in the biggest newspapers and he published more than 1,500 articles during the war. Somebody else, now Basin, sent a very interesting letter to Edinburgh and said that, how about, like, he talked about especially Western Ukraine, that was known at the time as territory where like a lot of Jews were killed, and Poles, of course. And he said that what Edinburgh thinks about this idea, because like in his mind, like probably such Soviet citizens, they do not have the right to live in the border provinces of Ukraine. Maybe this territory instead should be allocated to Jewish survivors and a Jewish republic to be established there. So it's interesting. Again, we see here basically an attempt to have a collective punishment for a group in a way that would be proportional, of course, like not directly proportional, but to some extent to extract a collective punishment for collective suffering of Jews. And from the last example, which is a 1949 example of a presumably Jewish woman who wrote a letter of complaint about the chairman of her sovkhoz, Matviyenko. And it's interesting that she's describing an abuse that took place 8 years ago, so quite late. But what I'm trying to say through this example is that some people who were in possession of that knowledge, they may use that knowledge even as late as like 1949 in this case. So she wrote in that letter, and like it's very interesting because she writes in a kind of a ironical language saying, so please, like the authorities, whatever, like investigate how in 1941 the chairman of Ruzhnitsa was drinking vodka with fascist Romanian intelligence member. Ask like who killed all Jews in Ruzhnitsa and how he himself started to plunder their houses. Let him explain how he, meaning Matviyenko, took by force the watch of a running Jewish old man and had made him, the old man, he sent him to be shot. Let him speak about the horse cart and the horse of a Jew plundered in broad daylight by the great Matviyenko. Plunderers and pogromists like Chairman Matviyenko are staying on our beloved Soviet power. So it seems like in this particular case, of course, you see that she is in possession of a lot of like details and information. It did result in the removal of this Matviyenko because an investigation basically confirmed that, you know, actually it was true what she was saying there. But another curious part of this case is that actually what really probably prompted here this complaint is that this Matviyenko imprisoned Kolesnik briefly for not paying her taxes. And so she decided like to basically weaponize the knowledge about what Matviyenko did in 1941, and actually successfully so. When speaking about the factor of fear that I promised to be talking about like at the beginning of my talk is the, I mean the fear that many Bessarabians felt. And interestingly, many Bessarabians felt, even if they were not directly involved in any kind of actions of violence against Jews themselves, but a feeling of collective guilt was, it was felt by many, according to the sources and the testimonies that we see, especially in places of Bessarabia where massacres of Jews occurred was the massive participation of civilians. And like Adrian is totally right, including in places like Pepin that he mentioned. And here's, I mentioned the case of Vasile Pâldeu. It was one guy who for 9 years was in disguise and coming only during the night as disguised as an old woman. And people from his village said it's because actually he was involved in killings and he was afraid that the Jews who survived would take revenge on him. So there were also some bizarre rumors, like the one I brought here, that the Jews were killing people and like frying them and eating them. An interesting case that I have a citation here that happened in the village of Onișcani. And this basically allows us to see how in one case, one person named Balerka was documented as being guilty of killing a Jewish woman called Ida. Then after the war, not yet arrested, because many of the people were arrested immediately in 1944, actually, he got sick and went to the hospital in the district. But since it's a small community and people know everything, the fact that he killed this person was common knowledge. So there, the chief medical doctor was the sister of this woman. So long story short, Balerka died. And then after a while, like his son died. So I'm doing this oral history interview, and the guy is telling me that at this time, somebody else from the village was Balerka and decided and was sick, but decided against going to the hospital. And the point was that all Balerka dies who go to the hospital. And so it's not about like, well, Balerka died or didn't die, but it was a clear understanding, a fear that, some of the members of the communities committed crimes against Jews. And it was this apprehension and like waiting and that, the revenge may strike them. And so the fear was real. It's not necessarily that we're talking that the revenge was real. In the case of Pepin, what I wanted to brought into attention, and again, like it's a very curious case of Moise Turcin, who survived the war because he was not in the village, but his family was killed. The interesting part for me about this, because I'm very much interested in like talking about stories of Jews as agents, as participating and like doing small and big letter history. I want to see how they acted. So this Moise Turcin, when he came home, in his village already over 30 people, 30 local perpetrators were arrested and put on trial. But the main person whom he saw, rightly so, as the main culprits, this guy who's you've seen in photograph, Ion Bordei, he already ran away. He was actually in the territory of Romania. So Moise Turcin, he goes for an entire month to Romania and he's trying to find him. He's trying to put together testimonies and like material, and he's trying to lobby for the Romanian authorities to have a case against this guy. In 1946, they do have a trial in absentia, and he is given a sentence of 20 years. He's caught only actually in 1957, and he didn't spend that much time in jail. By 64, he was free. But Moise Turcin, even when after that years, in several years, he went to Israel, he was writing from Israel, and yeah, Adrian also found in the archives, and we've seen in the archives the documents of Moise Turcin writing to the communist authorities of Romania and basically begging to find him and reminding them that this guy has to be punished. What I find also extremely interesting is, and when I said that Jews were very instrumental to this effort of bringing justice into the post-war society, I base this statement especially on the post-war trial materials. And what I see from those like post-war trial materials is that frequently a survivor, for example, a woman from Bogdanovka ghetto, in the market, she sees and recognizes a former Ukrainian guard. So what does she do? She goes like straight into the security office in that town, and the guy is arrested, and then she's a witness at the trial. This is not a singular case. I mean, like Jews were identifying, they were testifying, like some like Turchin were taking this like initiative to even like actively search for perpetrators. But also, what is interesting, it is a common trend in the way that Soviet investigations went to ask by the end of the interrogation of somebody as a witness or in whatever quality they were, do you have anything to add? In most of the cases, when Gentiles speak, it's like they don't have anything to add. But what is interesting, in the case of Jews, I noticed that as a trend, it's not infrequent actually for them to have something to add. And they do add information about the Holocaust. They want to say that they know exactly something else that happened. They will give the name, the description, when and how. So they provide this information. They volunteer additional information. Also from the trial, the open trials of perpetrators, and I have one example in Chisinau trials in 1947. We know a lot about the trial, not just because it was widely publicized, but also because the KGB at the time wanted to know what people think and talk, the way they talk about the trial. So they have this like documentation. They planted agents inside the courtroom. We also know, usually they indicate like who spoke, like the name of the person, what's the profession. So we're also able to identify Jews who commented on the trial. So this is how I also know that frequently the Jewish public is like probably really unhappy even with the fact that, you know, like the defendant receives the highest possible at the time sentence, 25 years, most of them, and only 2 of them received 20. But again, as in the case that I mentioned before, was a Jewish survivor who survived the previous ghetto of Pechora. People in court were saying that, you know, the Soviet power is showing an excess of humanism. These monsters should be destroyed and no need to stand on ceremony. And that was the feeling. So I'll get to my conclusions, and what I gave you through those citations is one of my conclusion is that among Jewish survivors there was a preference for very harsh and swift punishment of perpetrators. At the same time, of course, only very few were ready to take the matter of revenge into their hands. And most of the others sought justice in the court. Jewish involvement was really essential for the Soviet post-war justice effort. And as I said before, they testified, they convinced others to testify, and sometimes they even launched their own so-called investigations. In the places when Jews were the victims and were massive participation of civilians, local civilians took place, it was a silent fear that usually was enveloping the entire communities. And interestingly, in their understanding of what justice meant, Jews were like much closer to the Soviet official view than to that of their non-fellow Jews. Thank you very much. I'll stop sharing my screen and looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Diana, thank you very much. It's so interesting. Again, when we take a look at a specific area, how things are so different in different places. For example, the first thing I thought of was the Black Book of Soviet Jewry and how that book was not allowed to be published. And here you're saying that there were Jews that were able to bring perpetrators to justice, and it was a unique suffering. And so it's so interesting to see that there actually, like you said, there actually were cases where perpetrators were brought to justice, and it's not that overall black and white many weren't. There are so many questions. I don't know what to do. We have so little time. I asked Adrian to take a look if he had any question that you wanted to specifically answer. I just want to say that Grant Howard was here. I don't know if he's still here, and he had a few questions actually. So I think I'll take his question, and then there's a question for Diana as well. So Grant asked the question, were these police units specialized in mass killing? In other words, trained for it before the invasion, or did they become specialized in mass killing because they were called upon to take on this duty during the invasion? Very interesting question when all the rules are changing as they go along. So Adrian, of course, Diana, if you have something to add to that as well, because you also, by the way, wrote a book about it. I don't know if you can see it. Feel free, both of you, to answer.
So, of course, they specialized in the workplace, as we can say. So they got the skills and the numbness during the invasion. Mass killings of any kind were not allowed before the war, but some of the gendarmes and policemen were involved in different activities against Jews. As I said, in the 30s, the Liberal Party established a quasi-permanent state of emergency, and the government used the military and the police to follow the sensible political issues, the communist problem, the Jewish problem, the legionary problem, and so on. So part of the police was specialized in political police. So following the spirit of the population, noticing the suspects, arresting everybody who was against the government on a ideological platform, which was either communist or a far-right platform, and so on. So they had some training in anti-Semitic policies, but they got trained in the killings during the war. And this way, I answered to Irina Livezeanu as well.
Yeah, I also see a question from Irina. Hi, Irina, asking about if the trials were for crimes against Jews, or what the official charges. So you should understand that yes, they were put on trial for what they've done to Jews, because in many cases that was their only activity, especially we're talking about civilians who participated into the killing, into the raping, or into the plunder. That was what they were like documented as doing, and that is the matter of the trial. If you're talking about the legality and what was the charge, usually they used the existing old Soviet code, and they used the 54/1 article that basically charged them of anti-Soviet activities. And it's a kind of a crazy, I think, for whoever doesn't understand the logic behind. But the logic behind was such that if you go against the rules, and the rules are very broad, but like one of the rules is that you do not attack Soviet citizens. you do not act on ethnic hatred, because then you are trying to basically destroy the Soviet system. So that was an activity, and that specific one, it was about like acting on like ethnic types of hatreds, hostilities, because there was a long code, there was a different, including like holding, like having propaganda, for example, that was also anti-Semitic or, you know, nationalistic. So, or it could be used for other purposes, like less benign than this. But yeah, strangely so, among like those like broad cache of files that were like people tried on for anti-Soviet behavior, while some of them could have been like nice people and is judged because I don't know, they criticize the Soviet system, rightly so. You do at the same time have a category of people who are perpetrators of the Holocaust, and they were also charged on the same like article 54/1 or /10 or /11, basically trying to destabilize the Soviet system. And they were, you know, in the eyes of the authorities, you know, because they were not obeying like what authorities were expecting them to do. And they were not allowing them to attack like Soviet civilians. That's a simple kind of response to this.
I have to say that I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg. And like Adrian said at the beginning of his presentation, the research is new and archives are opening that weren't available beforehand. And some are now closed because of what's happening in Ukraine. But I think that we have an idea of maybe doing a conference at some point, because we only really just started the conversation. I think there are about 20 or 30 questions in the chat box that we won't be able to answer today because we need to end the program. And with that, I want to say once again, thank you to all our incredible speakers, to Greta Barak from the Ghetto Fighters House archive, to Adrian Cioflâncă, and to Dr. Diana Dumitru. Thank you again for your insights, for your research, for digging deeper and as deep as you can to get information out that will help us to better understand what the Holocaust was in different places, for different people, for Jews, for non-Jews, perpetrators, collaborators, and victims. And thank you again to our partners. Thank you to our audience. And I am grateful to be with you today. And we'll see you again next week. Toda. Thank you. And shalom.
Thank you all. Thank you for staying long hours for those like who especially, yeah, now it's like very late. Thank you. Bye.